Hi everybody. My name is James O'Donoghue, as it says on the slide there. I'm Deputy Director for Social Workforce at the Department for Education, and I'm joined by Jim. You want to introduce yourself, Jim?
Yeah, hello. Jim McGee. I'm in charge of the Early Career Development Program, which we were calling last year, for those who have been around a little while at our presentations, the Social Work Induction Program. But due to feedback that induction is normally something that happens in the first few weeks, we have changed the title. So the 2-year program for social workers in the first couple of years of their career.
Thanks, Jim. So first thing to say, really pleased and excited to be here talking about professional development for child and family social workers and how that relates to and can support embedding the CSC reform agenda that is ongoing, as you'll all know. As Jim says, we were here last year talking about our ambitions. Hopefully this year we're here talking about our plans with more information about what will be coming up for the sector in the next year or so. If we move on to the next slide, we're going to do our best Chris Whitty impressions today with Gavin moving the slides on for us. So just a bit of an overview of what we plan to talk about. I'll do a bit of kind of what the overall policy context is and the key actions that government is taking across children's social care. We will talk a little bit about the response to the consultation that we published in February and the new early career standards that we published alongside that consultation. And then we'll talk about a new professional development offer, so a suite of training for child and family social workers at different stages of their career, with 5 strands of that overall professional development offer that we're intending to introduce next year. We'll try and save some time for Q&A. I think Gavin's going to curate that for us, so see how much time we have at the end, and we'll do our best to answer everything. So if we move on again to the next slide, I'm not going to spend ages talking about the overall context and the actions that are going on across children's social care, but I always think it's helpful to try and sort of situate what we're talking about in terms of social work professional development within the overall policy context. And kind of big picture, you'll probably know that the government has 5 key missions it's driving towards, and the Department for Education is the lead department on the opportunity mission, which is all about, as the slide says there, breaking the link between a child's background and their success in later life. And there's various different pillars within the opportunity mission, one of which is the Keeping Children Safe pillar, which is all about children's social care, and so really focusing that on that aspect as a really key part of giving all children in the country the opportunities that they deserve. And I think what's really nice and what I think kind of comes from this where children's social care is placed is the importance the government places on this aspect of policy and of investment, and hopefully that will become clear as we go through. So if we move on again to the next slide. So in terms of children's social care, again, you'll be familiar with the national framework, but I think it is worth pausing on it. So the Children's Social Care National Framework is really the key piece of statutory guidance that has been brought forward in the last few years, kind of setting the outcomes that the children's social care system should achieve, as well as talking about the key enablers, one of the most important of which is the workforce. None of this can be a success without a really well-equipped, well-supported workforce, and within that, children and family social workers are absolutely critical. And when we're thinking about professional development for social workers and the national programs that we will be delivering through partners, we think about how do we align those outcomes and what the national framework is saying into the practice that social workers should be developing as they kind of take this stuff forward. So holding that in your mind as we kind of get through to the specifics of the development programs, I think is important. Other thing worth saying on this slide, so bold text there, there will be a refreshed version of the national framework published soon. I think that's quite soon, so do look out for it. It's not going to change the fundamentals, but it does update the national framework based on what we've learned over the last couple of years and tries to bring a bit more greater clarity to the way it's describing the outcomes and the enablers of the national framework. We move on again to the next slide. So there's been an awful lot of activity over the last few years, really, in children's social care. Really exciting time to be involved in this this sector, in this policy area. So just to give a bit of a run through in terms of what's been going on. You may remember in November 2024, so 18 months ago or so, we published a policy statement titled Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive, that sought to sort of set out the government's vision for children's social care and really lay the groundwork and set out the policy approaches that are being taken forward in the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. I'll say a little bit more about that in a second or two. Alongside all that work on the bill, there's been a huge amount of activity. So I won't read through the whole slide there, but things that you'll no doubt be familiar with. Introduction of the Families First Partnership Programme, really key government programme to help transform services for children. I think we've just closed a consultation on a new child protection authority, focusing on kind of how we get better national oversight of child protection in England. There is a consultation on adoption support, which is out at the moment. We also published recently a fostering action plan, trying to focus on how we increase the number of foster carers in the system. Lots of work on things like regional care cooperatives as well. And I guess the point of including this here when we're talking about professional development is to sort of make the point that there's tons going on. And we're really conscious of the amount of change that's happening at the moment within children's social care, and that points to a real need to support the whole workforce, but particularly social workers within that. There is a lot going on. I think our ministerial team would sort of make no apologies for that, that their view, and I think probably rightly, is that there's an urgency to the reforms that are being made, and you know, the longer it takes us to collectively make changes to improve our outcomes for children and young people. So lots going on where it's, you know, potentially difficult to kind of absorb it and translate that into practice, but an urgency to act as well. And then if we move on to the next slide, which I think is my last, before I hand over to Jim to talk a bit more about the details of our new professional development offer. So this is just to zone in a little bit on the legislation and funding that is being put in place and is in place. So I mentioned the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. That's a really broad piece of legislation, includes lots of measures on children's social care, as well as lots of things on the school side as well. And it's really important that we get the sort of legislative, if I can say that word, foundations right. Lots of the changes we're trying to make and the reforms that we're bringing in require changes to legislation. And you know, we were really Pleased and excited to get the opportunity to go in first session that put a really significant piece of legislation for the sector. Lots of things happening in there around multi-agency working, single unique identifier, family group decision making. I'm not going to list all the measures, but as I say, tons going on to provide that sort of foundation for reform. And then the other side of it is funding. So we've always been really clear that we're not going to make that shift in the system away from acute intervention, which is costly, but more importantly, not good for children's outcomes, without the sort of transformation investment that's required to do that. So over the spending review period, 2.4 billion invested by government in children's social care in various things, which I won't read the slide out. Significant part of that is the Families First partnership programme, as well as things around capital investment as well. But just to finish my bit, which I've said already, we can do lots of things. We can change legislation, we can invest money, and we can set policy priorities for reforming children's social care, but none of it will be successful without the workforce. And so to say two things. One, thank you to everyone who is working with children and young people day in, day out. That's the thing that really makes the difference. What we're trying to do is think about how we can introduce more programs, more support, more funding to kind of help people do that in the very best way possible. So with that, I will hand over to Jim to talk in a little bit more detail about what we are planning over the next few years. Jim.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone. Nice to be back again. Yeah, as James says, I'm going to talk about three things, I guess, really. The early career standards, which we published a couple of weeks ago, as James mentioned, the early career development program, which I lead, as I've mentioned, and also setting that in a wider professional development offer that James has alluded to a minute ago, which has 4 other programs as part of it. Just before I do that, though, and before we move on to the next slide, I just thought I would say a little bit about the current year of ASYE, Assessed and Supported Employment, which I know won't be for everyone, but some of you will be wondering where we are with that current 1-year program. We actually have an event tomorrow, which I can send the details on to SWE colleagues to sort of give you a sense of what's happening in a bit more detail if you are affected by it. But basically, we have one last year of ASYE. It's going to finish in March 27, though, which is quite deliberate because we need a small gap between the end of ASYE and the start of the new early career development program, because we don't want a sort of dual running situation where people are starting on ASYE one day and then a week or two later starting on a totally different program and going for a year and then the other one for 2 years. But equally, we don't want a huge gap because there'll be people who want to go on an induction program, quite rightly, funded by the department, which if it's a year or so would be too long to wait, clearly. So for the final year, from sort of this March to next March, if you like, it's a slight change to what's happened before. We won't be working with Skills for Care this time. We've put some guidance documentation, which is normally available on the Skills for Care site, on the gov.uk site, and we have a separate grant process, which will be different. Rather than a rolling program, we're looking at 3 sort of points over the next year where we'll be paying the grant that we pay for ASYE. So there are details out there at the moment about this. There's a session tomorrow, and if you're wondering, if you haven't clocked that change, then do go and see what we're talking about and follow up on gov.uk. Okay, I'll move on then to the sort of matter in hand and the sort of 2027 landscape onwards. So if you don't mind moving on, Kevin, to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So just to start with the response, which James mentioned. So we consulted last year, as I'm sure people will know, and I hope many of you replied. I'm sure you did. So we consulted on a range of things, really. So we consulted first of all on a set of new early career standards. We call them the kind of post-qualifying standards, which is what they're called in regs, but we're renaming them the early career standards, but it's the same thing. So we consulted on a new set, much longer and much more detailed than the post-qualifying standards that are currently on the gov.uk site, which have been around, as people know, since I think 2015 or so. So we asked a lot of questions about those standards, and that was the main focus of the consultation. And we also asked about the programme that might follow to bring those standards to life, the new 2-year programme, which, as I'm sure many of you know, was long heralded in the care review and the stable homes response that we published. And then we also talked about some other programmes that we might make available. I think we call them advanced programmes, but ones beyond the first couple of years of a social worker's career. And again, the care review had talked about the need for something specific in child protection, for example, and we asked about that, and we asked about leadership programmes as well. Generally, what we heard in the response then, so on the early career standards, I think the broad consensus was that the matters that the standards covered were the right ones. The people didn't feel there's anything massively missing. There were a few suggestions, but they tended, to be honest, to be more sort of nuanced. Like, could we say more about a certain topic rather than this is germane to social work for people at the start of their career and you're just not talking about. So we didn't get really anything like that. People felt that the 6 standards that we talked about and the outcome statements were sensible ones to be focusing on. There was some call, though, for the standards to be shorter, because for those who remember this and saw them, we were with some spacing, admittedly, we were at around 40 pages. It was quite a long document compared to the current PQS, which I think are around sort of 10 to 15 or so. So there was a challenge to us, I think, to sort of reduce just the amount of words we were using. And people were concerned, I think, that new social workers would be held to every single statement. There was a sort of confusion about what these standards represented. And our intention clearly was that the outcome statements, which I'll talk about shortly, were the things that were there to show that you could practice at that level. You weren't going to be held to account for every single statement below, which were more to show you the things you should know and be able to do to practice effectively. But we took that feedback on board, and we obviously don't want people to feel overwhelmed by what was produced. And as you'll see shortly, we have a sort of somewhat stripped back version of the standard, which still covers the same matters, we think, but just does it in a more succinct way. And then on the programme that would follow the standards for social workers in the first 2 years of their role, we offered a suggestion of a range of things we might do to provide more support for people to introduce that program. And there was a pretty strong response for all of the things we suggested, from funding to materials, other support, etc., for those things to be in place. So while I think people generally have accepted the move to a 2-year program is a good thing, I think there was some anxiety we were picking up from the consultation about exactly how that would work and what would be needed. And again, when I come to talk about the program that we're proposing, you'll see we're responding to that sort of feeling of support being needed. And then we asked about some other programs, and generally I think people were sort of saying yes, other programs and other learning development would be useful in this space, because as James has said quite rightly, there's an awful lot going on here. There are some quite big structural changes, and I think it's completely appropriate for the department to be looking at the sort of support we can offer if we're reforming the system in the way we have over the last 3 to 4 years. Okay, can we move on? That's great. Okay, so I'm just going to do a couple of slides on the early career standards. These are on gov.uk. If you haven't seen them already, do go and have a look at them. This is just a table which provides a snapshot of the 6 standards across the top and the outcome statements down each column. So from the version we consulted on, there are a couple of changes I think to mention. One is we've slightly reordered the standards. We've also called them standards, not domains, I think, to bring them into line with other similar frameworks, to be honest, but they remain the sort of top level things that we're going for here. So we have the first 3 standards are now the arc of, at a very high level, the sort of business of social work in the children's services sector. So we have comms and relationships, assessment and planning, and intervention as the first three. And then the following three are the hows that you might be using to achieve successful outcomes. So anti-discriminatory practice, the reflection and learning, and the multi-agency teams and sort of leadership role, which points towards the standards that are to follow from these. We're working on a set of lead child protection standards now. And then below them, we have a set of outcome statements. These are not changed dramatically from the version we consulted on, but we've reduced them. I think there were 26 in the document previously. We've now got, I think, 20 there. So there's still a few, but we've managed to, to sort of be a bit more focused on the things that we're really wanting people's attention to be drawn to. And as part of the response, as I say, that suggested that this was quite a long frame with quite a lot in it, we've made some changes at this top level. And then in the slide that follows, I'll talk in a bit more detail about the changes we've made elsewhere. But the outcome statements are the things that, so these sort of light blue, if you can see it in the color, but the things below the very top level are the things that we want social workers to be able to demonstrate in the first 2 years in practice. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, that's okay, thank you very much. So this is a sort of deep dive cross-section of the standards, going from the standard at the top. So standard 1 builds and maintains impactful relationships, communicates effectively with children, parents, and families. That's the first standard of the framework, going back to the slide you just saw. And then this is a sort of cross-section of what then happens throughout the document, starting with just the first section of the framework as a whole. So we then have, below standard 1, we have the outcome statements. So we've now, I think there were a few more than this in the previous version. We now have sort of 2 essentially. Building and maintaining impact relationships with children, parents, family, carers. We still wanted to separate those because there are quite different skills in play there, as people will know. And then communicate complex, difficult information clearly. So they're the 2 outcomes that we think people should be aiming for in this standard. And then you have 2 sets of statements. I should say they don't look like this on gov.uk in the version we've published, because to make it accessible, we can't have text in boxes and we can't have a sort of tabular format. So currently it's in a sort of list of bullets, which is basically, it's more accessible for screen readers to access. We might publish a separate document which has it in a more sort of left to right format as well, because that is a little bit easier to see the effect we're going for. Like normally the learn that is on the left, and then the learn how to is on the right, because they do reflect each other, but just to explain, they look different. Okay, so then we have a set of learn that statements, which I think we were calling knows statements before, but I think it's it's the same premise here of the sort of key things you should be grappling with in order to understand how you operate in this standard effectively, and then the learn how to, which I think we had do's previously, but the things that you should be learning how to accomplish, the sort of skills, if you like, that you'll need to bring to bear in order to be effective. So a slight reorientation, but essentially below the level of the outcome statements, we have far fewer learn that and learn how to statements, but they're generally, I hope people would agree, dealing with the same material. Nothing has been, there isn't a really important thing that has just been totally omitted. We've just tried to trim it back. The writing group that worked on the standards with us, or wrote the standards that we consulted on, came back and looked really hard at the responses that we had and checked there was nothing missing, and where there were things they could add in, they've put them in. But they also undertook a fairly major job to sort of prune back the content. So I think we're now at around 20 pages or so, which is a considerable reduction. But I think we feel that the matters that are being dealt with are not sort of qualitatively different. We're just expressing them in a clearer way. So, in slower time, maybe be interested in people's views on that, because that was absolutely our intention, was to not lose anything really crucial, but to make it a little bit more digestible for people. Because, as I say, a fairly strong theme from the consultation of those who wanted to say things that could be better was that the document was pretty long. Okay, so they were published, I think the 9th of Feb on Gov.uk now, with the government response, which explains people's, what people said and what we've done. And these are the new standards that will be in place from the autumn, September of 2027. So while it's completely free for employers to have a look at them and think about what it means, and we absolutely encourage that for the final year of the assessed and supported year of employment, it is the current post-qualifying standards that are the guide, and these new standards will be in place for the new program as it comes into effect the autumn of 27. Okay, thanks, Evan. I'm going to move on to talk about that program a little bit now. So this is the suite as a whole. So this has been undergoing a bit of revision and fine tuning as we get quite near to the point where we want to put things out to the market. But we're basically, this is what James is alluding to, and we're saying we felt we had an obligation to provide more support to the sector given the amount of change that's been going on. But these are the 5 programs. So we're calling these programs within an overarching national professional development offer. These are the 5 programs that we're hoping to offer across the piece to the sector from the autumn of 2027. So we have the early career development program, which I lead on the left. Then we have the lead child protection practitioner program. And then we have 2 leadership programs. People might remember there's a pathways program until not too long ago. So while this won't be exactly the same as pathways, it's a similar territory. It'd be geared to the new national framework that James talked about. But we have 2 leadership programs that we're proposing. One focusing very much on family help management supervision, because as James has just been saying, that's such a huge change in the system that we think it merits a leadership program of its own, a separate leadership program for those sort of heads of service type level. And then as I think people will know, it's already there's a program being delivered by the Staff College, a DCS leadership program, including those serving and those aspiring to that role. So that's the suite that we're proposing to offer for 27. There might be other things in the future. So we've heard from the sector already that there are other things that you might want to focus on, other key areas of specialism that we might want to offer programs on. But this is our pitch at present, given the spending review we've been through, the consultation that we heard people's responses on. These align broadly to the things we were asking in the consultation as well. So this is what we're bringing forward. I'm going to talk in most detail probably about the early career development program, not least because it's the one I work on, but more importantly, I think than that it's probably a different program it's a more different program to the current world of ASYE than the other programs will be, I think, to their predecessors where they had. Well, obviously there hasn't been a child protection program to date, but I think the leadership programs will there'll be a consistency across these. The early career standards are providing a benchmark for them to build up from. We have the national framework, so there's obviously a lot of synergy between them. But I think the early career program is probably a little different to what people might have expected. So I'll say a bit more about that now. Okay, move on to the next slide. That's okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is, I'm just going to use this graphic. Actually, I'm just going to pause on this and talk more about this early career program probably. But this graphic, which might be a bit tricky for people to read, and obviously you can have this pack and so read it in slower time. But this is just trying to sort of show who those 5 programs are for. So the programs are sort of there in the middle block, roughly how many people we expect to be going on them. So the early career program is a 2-year program, as I've said. There's 2,800 to 3,000 people could be going on it, etc. And then the other 4 programs with the sort of intakes, the time they would last, who might be going on them, etc. So that's just setting out in a bit more of a sort of graphical form for those who like that sort of thing. But for the early career program, then just pausing on that for a second. We're thinking that the new early career standards do set a new bar that despite the fact, as I've said, that you don't have to meet every single statement. There's there's a lot in them. They're geared very much towards social work as it is now. They're forward facing, thinking about the family help and the other programs coming in from the care review, and the focus of that's always sort of had on keeping people together, managing the risk, etc., wherever possible, and things. So it is quite a different beast to the previous PQS, and we think the program that follows it needs necessarily to look quite different to the assessed and supported year in employment. So we are looking at a program that is more supplier led. So we're looking for suppliers to provide content, so to write more curriculum type materials where we're going through the standards, and we're looking very hard at the knowledge and skills that are required to practice effectively at this level. And we're thinking of something that draws on the work that employers do now with their new social workers, insofar as they tend to have a supervisor or a practice educator or someone working with them to reflect on their own cases, and also draw on the standards, the SWE standards, and the PQS and the PCF of BASWA. And we're looking to sort of build on that, but make a program that's more focused on making sure the knowledge and skills that the early career standards embody can be imparted to people, and they can have a go at sort of understanding that more closely and practicing in line with what's now being set in the outcome statements and the 6 standards of the new framework. And then hearing what we heard in the consultation about the I think, as I say, the anxiety about the amount of support that we needed for people to sort of bring a new program forward that reflects these standards and unpicks the knowledge and skills set out within the statements. We feel that to have a sort of nationally consistent picture, we need really high quality materials that we feel we don't think that every single employer writing their own materials to make this new to meet these new standards is going to be the most effective way of bringing forward a program. And as people will know, I think the world of assessed and supported employment is generally fairly light on content. There's nothing formally set. There's a set of requirements around meeting the standards, but then what happens in between is largely left to individual employers to determine. We feel that the challenge of these standards and the very specific things that they're asking requires a more specific program. So we will be tendering shortly for a supplier or suppliers to develop materials, work with employers, sort of harnessing their supervisors or practice educators. We found from research we've done that differs. So we're sort of more setting the requirements that we'd like employers to meet, rather than exactly who will do that. But we basically want suppliers to work with employers on a program that's more specifically bringing these standards to life across the 2 years than has previously been the case. So just sort of say, I'm sure there'll be some questions about that. Whereas the other 4 programs that we're talking about in the offer, the lead child protection practitioner, family help and supervision, the leadership for heads of service, and the DCS, are probably slightly more familiar to people, in the sense that there will be a supplier involved. They'll work in groups or specifically with the individuals on those programs. And really, in a way, what we're doing is bringing the early career program into line with that type of approach, so that the programs are going to look more similar than they might have done. But I'm aware that that's a change perhaps from the position we were taking a year or so ago, when we were thinking something more employer-led. But having reflected on the standards and heard the consultation response, we're thinking it's still a program for employers, but there will be suppliers supporting quite heavily. Okay, shall we move on to the next slide, if that's okay? So why, I think I'll probably cover this. This slide probably could have been a bit earlier, actually. But why are we doing all of this? I think is a fair question. I think James's comments earlier, we provided some of the answer in part. But as I say, I think we think the early career standards set a sensible but high bar for what should be achieved. And as I say, the other programs will be building out from that and from the new national framework. So I think if we're putting these standards alongside the reforms that are taking place, the two are completely there to reflect each other, that there is a need for more out there to support people. And I think, as I've said as well, we're looking at things that are more nationally consistent to meet the challenge that we've set as being part of the, as James says, the opportunity mission. And we think that what happens currently in some areas, is more variable maybe than it needs to be, given the challenge we face. Given, as James has said quite rightly, the workforces are, you're the people who will help us, see the change we want and bring in the reforms that we're looking to bring in this government. So that's the sort of rationale for what's happening. I think, should we just move on? Next slide. Just some timelines here. So we're looking, you say, spring 2026. So we're talking to the sector as we speak at events like this, and we're also talking to prospective suppliers. Obviously, local authorities and other employers are perfectly entitled to be part of that supplier setup. So we have Jagger as our portal. So if people want to register themselves on Jagger, completely great. We'd like to see you. We're looking to launch the procurement for all of the materials to be developed for these programs in May, if at all possible, which, as you probably see from looking at this timeline and the 5 programs, this is all quite challenging stuff, but we're confident it can be achieved. We're working, as I mentioned, on a new set of lead child protection practitioner standards, which we're hoping to publish in May as well. So there will then be a procurement process going on for suppliers to come forward with proposals to meet our requirements across the 5 programs. And I'm not just talking about the early career program here, the 5 that I listed earlier. And then we would hope to select suppliers to deliver those programs by the September of this year, which is also the point as a year out before the programs would commence, that we would want to be communicating to employers what was coming in, some detail, the various roles that this would involve. We expect suppliers to bring us a learner management system, for example, so there'd be coordinator roles to make sure people are signed up to the programs, etc., and the assessment demands and all those sorts of things in much more detail. So that's coming in the autumn. I should say, by the way, we didn't maybe say this at the start, but because we were waiting to get the consultation published and we were working on the standards, we haven't really been out to talk to employers for quite a long time. We accept that. So this is very much now, from now to the autumn, is when we really want to start engaging with you, engage with the groups that you are represented by, and talking about these programs. So, we see from here to September the start of a process really of regular discussions. And then we see March 27, we see the last intake of ASYE, as I've mentioned. Actually, a tiny bit earlier, it's probably sort of technically February, I think, because we need to shut systems down, etc. And also the DCS leadership program in its current form would end at that point. And then, as you can see here, from September 27, we'd be looking to have the 5 new programs up and running. They might not all start, obviously, literally in September 27, but we want them to be commencing from that date. And clearly for the early career program, which I lead on, the autumn is the time when a lot of the graduates are taking up their first roles, and so we're really, maybe September is like literally not the month we would start, but starting in that time of year is obviously important, because the quite a large intake of new social workers come at that point in the year. So I think that's my set of slides. I hope that helps, and we do have a bit of time for questions now, don't we? Which I think there's probably been already some put forward, and I think we're now going to have a set of them, Gavin, which you're going to sort of put to James and I, and we'll do our best to answer. If we can't get through them all, we can take them away as well.
Yes, and first of all, can I just say a big thank you for that? That was really comprehensive. We have got a number of questions, so I'll put them to you. I'll put them to you now then. So there's some, well, the first one, I think there's been a few people who have asked this, which is about the event tomorrow. Do you have any way of sharing the details? Is there any way that people can access that? Or
yes, let me maybe move on to the next question, because I won't be able to multitask here at all, but I can probably post in the, am I allowed to post in the chat, Gavin? Or can I send it to someone that... Maybe I do have an Eventbrite link which I can send on to someone.
Okay, I was going to suggest if there's any place that we can like steer people towards, that would possibly be easier. But otherwise,
I have a link. It's a virtual event. one for
Okay.
Eventbrite. So I will maybe send it to one of your team, and it can be passed on to people,
Yeah.
can't it? Shall I do that?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Great
Yeah, will do.
stuff.
Okay.
And so the next question is oh yeah, there's a question about the slides as well. I'll just say to everybody the slides will be shared post event. So yeah, a question about the you mentioned about the PCF before, the professional capabilities framework, and the question was really about is there going to be a sort of the early career standards, will they fit in with the professional capabilities framework?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We do talk to Baz. I mean, obviously the PCF offer both adults and children. I think it's probably the first point to make, isn't it? And they're also quite a bit higher. Well, I'd say the higher level. I mean, in some ways, the standards we've got cover the the early career standards cover the business of social work as we would see it in the first few years. I mean, the PCF are there for a period of the social workers working life, aren't they? So they do differ in that sense. And I think ours are quite a bit more specific now because they've been developed expressly for people in the first 2 years, which the piece and for people in children's services. But I wouldn't say there's anything in the PCF which our standards contradict at all. I think we're just going to a level of detail that's different, essentially, would be my thought. James, I don't know if you have anything on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I agree. The thing I was going to add was, so I think it's certainly the case in social work and in children's social work that the different standards can sometimes be confusing to people. I don't think I'm telling anyone anything they don't know. In developing the early career standards, we were certainly very focused on making sure they were coherent with Social Work England standards, so that the regulatory standards Social Work England have, the improvement standards that have a legislative underpinning that we're using to bring forward the early career standards are all consistent with one another. But as Jim says, I don't think there's anything contradictory in the BASWA-owned PCF either. But really happy to kind of hear feedback on that as well.
Thank you. Now, Jim, I've just been told we're going to open up the chat so you can put that link in.
Oh, okay, fine. I've just sent it to one of your.
It's been open
specifically for me. Okay, let me just. Well, thank you very much. I will just post it here. Right, here we go. Right, there you go. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, another question here is about you've made reference to the suppliers, and the question, a couple of questions that have come in about how they'll be sourced. Is this about employers finding those suppliers themselves, or do they come from elsewhere?
So the plan will be that we will contract with suppliers who will put forward their proposals, and then once we have suppliers who are there offering these programs, we'll have a probably as part of our support for social work site or another site, we will make it clear to the sector who is available to supply which program, and then I think it's for employers to look at the offer there and to talk to suppliers who they might want to work with. And suppliers themselves would be, making approaches. I would have thought if they're already, if they already work with employers and have people they've known from other programs, they might well be saying, well, we've got this program and we're going to be offering it, if you'd like to sign up. So obviously we haven't appointed anyone yet because we haven't launched procurement, so we don't have any suppliers right now. So it's all hypothetical, but that's the plan.
Yeah, no, thank you. Also, there's a question here about national consistency. I think, is there going to be any? I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but how you ensure the national consistency and that things don't become regionalised. Do you have any ways of ensuring that happens?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I mean, there is also, though, I think sorry, this isn't the question I was asked, but I'm just going to mention it as well. There is also sort of local need, isn't there, and tailoring things to that, which we also must think about. But yes, we would be. I mean, precise details to be determined. But we would expect the suppliers to be offering these programs across the country, so we probably wouldn't be setting them up in a regional way anyway. They would all obviously have to meet the bar that we set, and they would have to put things forward that showed us that they could deliver the sort of programs we want. There would be a QA process which we would run to go through the materials and make sure, for example, in the early career program, that they were meeting the standards and were of the right quality, had the right sort of pedagogical approaches. So anyone coming forward to offer a program would have been through that process set up by us. So we would be ensuring consistency sort of centrally in that way, and then we would be working, contract managing the supplier to deliver the programs to the quality we want to see.
Yeah, thank you. And there's also an acknowledgement of newly qualified social workers who aren't working in, say, local authorities, who may be working in the non-statutory sector. Are there any thoughts about their needs?
So we've said in the consultation response that the new programme is there for people in statutory children's social work, in which we define, obviously, the bulk of that is in local authority employment, or possibly in other private fostering arrangements, etc., on behalf of an authority, or CAFCAS, obviously, who operate, as people will know, with their own statutory framework. So we aren't proposing to offer this to people who aren't engaged in statutory social work. We're thinking about whether we make the material, if we're talking particularly about the early career program, which I think we are here, we are thinking about whether we make the materials available, though, for people to look at themselves. So when we have a set of seminars and sessions on the matters set out in the early career framework, we might well be making them available publicly, as happens in other sectors, for people to look at.
And just to add, people may not know, but it's certainly the case that the vast majority of people who undertake the Child and Family ASY at the moment are engaged in statutory social work. So there isn't a kind of huge cohort of people who would have received support who now won't receive support.
No, it's single figures some years of people who aren't currently.
Now we have a question here, which is recognising there feels often when it comes to reforms that there's a need for urgency, and I think what the person who's asking here really is asking about where the confidence can be that things are going to be, well, how things are going to be managed really in terms of these reforms.
To the time, specifically, I think you're thinking, yeah. Well, I mean, September 27 is a challenging timeline. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But we have been really carefully through the times that we need to, get the procurement launched, get suppliers in. We've been talking to people. We've had a series of market engagement events with people who are potentially keen to be suppliers, and we've been getting their feedback on the timings that we're looking at, etc. So, I mean, we're doing all we can to make sure that we're proceeding in a very pacey way, which the government wants us to do, but also one that will actually see us deliver, and we're confident that we're in the right territory. Clearly, we need to make sure employers are well aware of what's planned and the timelines that work for them. And also, as I say, September 27 is when we're looking to start these programs on, but we need to work out really precisely when each one's first cohort would be working through, and we'd be sending out more details on that shortly. So, well, in during this year, I think I was saying September as a major guidance point. James, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely agree with all that, as you'd expect. So I didn't know whether the question is focusing on kind of our new national professional development programs or the kind of broader children's social care reform agenda. So just to sort of extend what Jim's saying, I guess, in terms of the kind of scale of change. I really recognise that there's a lot going on, there's a lot shifting around. We're monitoring that very closely, both nationally and sort of with different local authorities. And I think really importantly, as I was saying at the top, backing that up with investment, 2.4 billion additional to largely to fund that transformation of services. It's a kind of whole system effort to make sure we get to where we need to get to. But at the moment, we're confident it can be done.
Thank you. And James, I got to say, I like how you politely always put your hand up before you you answer a question. Um, I think perhaps one of the part of the way that question's been phrased as well is one is looking at time, but the other bit as well is looking at the impact perhaps for the people who are the beneficiaries of the service. I mean, what would you say in terms of that? If we were talking to the people who are on the receiving end of social work services, what might they see?
That's a really good question. I think what I would say is it's about them, and the scale of investment, the level of activity, the demands and pressure that we are asking for, that the sector is asking for, is about trying to make improvements for service users, for children and families, because they deserve to have the same, chances and opportunities as everyone else. And so that's the reason for doing it, and that's why there's an urgency and a level of impatience, if that's a word, to make the changes. But and we'll only succeed if everyone's pulling in the same direction. So we've got, really clear set of outcomes we're aiming for in the national framework. I think a really clear vision, and yeah, we need to get it done.
And it's still going back, really, isn't it, to the care review and the stable homes response, where the early career standards are very much trying to bring about the things that were talked about there, of trying to keep people with the families where possible, to manage the risk, etc., etc. So it's all about bringing, that sort of goal alignment across what the department's been doing for the past 4 or 5 years in this area and beyond.
Thank you. Now, I've get the impression from some of the questions that I've seen that there's some people who work in adult services. Now, I appreciate things are quite different, really. But that said, is there any conversation going on in terms of synergy between adults and children, or at least some collaboration going on there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Department for Health and Social Care are responsible for adult social work policy and programmes. We talk to our colleagues in DHSC regularly. I think we've got a workshop with them on Thursday, in fact. In terms of their plans, there's a huge agenda around adult social care as well, and we know that they're looking closely at what is happening in the children's social care space, seeking to learn lessons in terms of what works and what they might bring forward as well. And for things like the initial education of social workers, obviously that is a kind of, all social work initial education results in a generic, for want of a better word, qualification across adults and children's. So we work with them incredibly closely on that. DHSC have got a consultation out at the moment about the social work bursary, for example, talking to them about that a lot. And the other thing we are and will be talking to them about over the coming months is the independent review of social work regulation, which obviously touches both adults and children. So yes, different departments own the policy for adult social work and children's social work, but we work incredibly closely together on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, it would be great to sort of carry on speaking about this, but I'm mindful that we are approaching the end of our time. I'm just wondering if there are any sort of final reflections or things that you'd want to share as we approach the end of this session.
I think I'd be keen to as I've said, this is we've done a couple of events in the last few weeks in a few different fora, and we're going to be talking more to ADCS and others about the reforms as we go forward, but just wanting to hear from people about the sort of offer that we've put forward and their views. And I was really keen we keep that discussion going as we move forward.
Okay. Well, look, I would like to say thank you both for this today. It's been really helpful, and I'd like to say thank you to everybody for attending. We've had very good attendance today, and it's good to see you all. So as I said earlier, we have a number of other sessions happening across the week, and you are more than welcome to book onto those. I'm seeing lots of claps going on for you both, Jim and James. So again, thank you very much for your time today, and I hope to see everybody again soon, and see you further events on for Social Work Week. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.